Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com. If you enjoy our show, don't forget to help us out by subscribing to this podcast, sharing it with a friend, and providing us with a review on iTunes. Check out the show notes below for the link. Thanks, and enjoy the show.
Today I wanted to talk about making mistakes in the Big Four. It's a common misconception that you can't make mistakes in the Big Four accounting firms. And this is because the Big Four are built upon their reputations. They are known for auditing financial statements and preparing tax returns and other important information. The essence of auditing a financial statement is to audit it to be accurate. Many people think that this means 100% accuracy, but it doesn't really. Auditing is really reasonable assurance. It's not 100% accuracy. And preparing a tax return, you are supposed to be 100% accurate. There's no sense of materiality, but it's not really possible, and the IRS knows this. What I find not only in myself, but in other new hires of the Big Four is that they're very afraid to make mistakes because of this notion that in accounting you have to be 100% right. But it's hard to be 100% right as a human being, especially when you have to do your day job, which is auditing or preparing tax returns. And what that means is data entry, filling out templates, filling out work papers, in addition to doing lots of research. You also have to schedule meetings for your superiors, send out emails, and fill out your timesheets. You also have to stay current with your independence requirements and fill out engagement letters, statements of work, and MSAs, etc. There's no way you can do all this, do your day job, do your research, stay compliant with other requirements, and not make a mistake. In the Big Four, it is almost impossible not to make a mistake. And many people would think that since the Big Four audit companies for their controls, that the Big Four would have very good controls themselves, and there would be amazing processes to make employees aware of all the things, to make employees aware of all common mistakes and help them avoid it. But the Big Four don't really have many checklists or automation to avoid mistakes. A lot of the work in the Big Four hinges upon self-ownership and your own ability to do correct work. You have to be able to stay compliant with all the Big Four's rules and requirements and the work processes, and you have to do this all on your own. What this requires is it requires you to do a lot of research on your own. And since they don't have extremely good controls of the Big Four and checklists to keep you in compliance, it's easy to make an error. So what happens when you do make an error? What are you supposed to do? Do you get fired? Do you have to quit, resign? Do the Big Four investigate you? Well, let's go over that. You'll find that there are a lot of errors made in the Big Four. Just think of all the lawsuits that have happened recently. Think of the Taylor Bean lawsuit with PwC, or the KPMG South Africa scandal, or the Deloitte hack. Those are examples of huge errors. And in the case of KPMG South Africa, the partners were fired. But in Taylor Bean, the partners at PwC were not necessarily let go, or at least not right away. Think of all the PCAOB inspections that the Big Four go through. There's errors found in there all the time. And those partners don't get fired, but they can get reprimanded and they can lose equity. So what happens to staff and people lower than partner? It depends on who you work with. But the typical way it gets documented is not right away, and it might not be to your face. It might be in your performance feedback that you get at the end of the year. So you might not necessarily know right away. And it also depends on the people you work with. Sometimes the people you work with aren't nice and they might yell at you for making mistakes. But that doesn't mean you should avoid all mistakes. You will make mistakes in your career. You will miss significant numbers. It's just a part of the Big Four process. And that's why they have insurance. Part of becoming a partner at the Big Four is that you have to buy insurance because there's likelihood that you or the people under you will miss something. If you are terribly afraid of making mistakes in the Big Four, then the Big Four aren't for you. But this doesn't mean you shouldn't be cautious. You should still be cautious not to make small, minor mistakes everywhere. That'll damage your reputation and the firm's reputation. This isn't a startup environment where breaking things and moving fast is encouraged. When you make mistakes at the Big Four, you have to show that you put 100% effort into the work. And this typically means a lot of documentation showing that you've done a lot of work. For example, if you're auditing a financial statement line item, and the way you're doing this is by summing a set of numbers, and you forgot a number in your work, that might be okay as long as you have a lot of work papers showing the amount of work you did. But if you just went into Excel and highlighted a set of numbers and relied on the sum at the bottom right hand of Excel's window, that's not good enough. It doesn't show your thought process or your work processes. And this is the same thing if you get audited by the PCAOB. They will always be looking for your work papers and the amount of effort that you put into your work. So what are some common mistakes? Some common mistakes that I've seen in the Big Four have occurred in the following situations. For example, formatting errors in slides sent to clients. And what I mean here is that I've seen slide decks sent out to certain clients that had another client's name in it. And this was because the same slide deck that was previously used on a client was used on another client. And this is just a formatting error. Another situation where I've seen errors occur is not following prior year's information correctly. In the Big Four, a lot of reliance is put on prior year's information to do the current year project. And what I've seen happen here is people on an engagement did not interpret prior year's project correctly when rolling information over. And to continue along those same lines, another area where I've seen mistakes is relying on prior year's information that was wrong. And what happened here was prior year's information or deliverable was wrong, and the staff people or people on the engagement relied on it too heavily. And they did not think critically when rolling it over, and they did not catch the mistake in prior year's information and just rolled that right over. Other areas where I've seen mistakes happen are people not reviewing their own work, grammatical errors, and technical errors resulting from people not having enough technical knowledge. Now that we have the mistakes, how can you avoid making some mistakes? One of the key ways I feel you can avoid making mistakes is by taking your time. The more you rush through things, the more chances you have to make mistakes. And this happens just because your own thought processes aren't able to catch up to what you're doing. This frequently happens close to deadlines at the Big Four, because when you're close to deadlines and you're finished preparing something, you rush through your own review, and the people above you rush through their review, and things don't get caught. So if you see yourself and your team rushing through work, then just be cognizant that you might be making mistakes. And I would also stress taking time in the review of your own work. And the way I would do this would be to prepare your assignment and then take a break from it. Whether that's 30 minutes or an hour or a day, whatever amount of time you have, just take a break. Then come back to your work with a fresh set of eyes, and make sure to take your time. If you take your time, you'll really set yourself apart from your peers, because you will make less mistakes. Your peers are going to be rushing through things, or at least most people in the Big Four rush through things and just try and get it out the door. And I don't even mean big mistakes. I mean small things like grammatical errors and formatting errors, things like that. We all want to impress people by getting them things very quickly, but sometimes people don't like getting things early and having it wrong. People like getting things a little bit later and correct. And this is especially true of clients. Clients like receiving their deliverables very well formatted and correct versus getting them early and wrong. So what should you do if you do make a mistake? If you do make a mistake and you catch it, then tell your superior or tell a client and apologize, and you should offer to correct it. Another thing you should do in addition to apologizing is keep track of your mistakes. Keep track of your mistakes in a place where you won't lose the information. This way, you can learn from your mistakes and not make them in the future. And oftentimes you do make mistakes in the areas where you are least interested or your skills are the weakest. And keeping this list will be a roadmap for you on how to improve your habits and your behavior in the future to avoid making mistakes in the future. For example, if you keep making mistakes in an area you're not interested in and an area where you haven't done that much research, you should probably pursue learning opportunities and courses in that area so you can get better. Or you might need to reassess your thinking on that subject in order to figure out a way to make yourself more interested in that subject. And apologizing in the Big Four for your mistakes should work for most people. But if it doesn't, and you get yelled at and reprimanded severely, then another thing you should do is consider whether you should be in that group. Because if your group doesn't allow minor mistakes and accept an apology for it, then there's probably something wrong with that group. I found that people in groups that expect perfection out of everyone means they don't review their work very much. And so they want their staff people and their people in general to have perfect work, to cover their own rear ends. You aren't going to learn from those type of people because they're not reviewing your work and they're not telling you what they expect. And they expect you to teach yourself and review your own work. You're not going to learn from reviewing your own work. You have to learn from making mistakes and having people teach you. And not making mistakes is not realistic, and you shouldn't work with people that expect that. In conclusion, we all make mistakes, Even accountants make mistakes. Even auditors of the world's largest financial statements make mistakes. Making mistakes is how we all learn. But you have to make sure that you learn from those mistakes and learn how to avoid them in the future. You also have to know how to act and react when a mistake happens. And I hope that we've provided some valuable information today about it being okay to make mistakes in the Big Four, and how to prevent mistakes and how to learn from those mistakes. To get more Big Four career tips and Big Four news, make sure to subscribe to this podcast.
We appreciate your help in growing this podcast so we can continue to bring you the best Big Four content possible. You could help us out by providing a review on iTunes, sending us an email with your comments, and don't forget to share with your friends. There's a link below in the show notes. That's our show for today. Thanks for listening and have a great day.